In just 72 hours, she went from Eric Adams' most trusted ally to his worst nightmare. Maria Torres-Springer didn't just resign as deputy mayor, she obliterated every bridge behind her and walked straight into Zohra Mamdani's transition team. The woman who knew every Adams scandal, every backroom deal, every corruption scheme, had just switched sides in the most consequential political betrayal in New York history. What did Torres-Springer discover that made her abandon the mayor who'd given her everything and join the Democratic Socialist who promised to investigate everything? August 15, 2025, 6:43 a.m. Maria Torres-Springer arrived at City Hall earlier than usual, her keycard granting access to the eerily quiet corridors of municipal power. As deputy mayor for housing and economic development, she was accustomed to these pre-dawn strategy sessions that shaped policy for 8 million New Yorkers. But this morning was different. Instead of heading to her corner office overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge, Torres-Springer walked directly to Mayor Eric Adams' private conference room. She had documents to review before their 7 a.m. meeting, documents that would shatter her faith in the administration she'd served for 3.5 years. The manila folder on the conference table was marked Confidential Housing Development Partnerships. Inside were contracts, correspondence, and financial agreements that revealed the systematic corruption Torres-Springer had suspected but never confirmed. Adams had been selling housing policy to the highest bidder. Torres-Springer had dedicated her career to affordable housing. Born in the Bronx to Dominican immigrant parents, she'd seen firsthand how housing inequality devastated working families. Her mother cleaned office buildings while studying English at night school. Her father drove delivery trucks while saving for a down payment on their first apartment. Housing wasn't abstract policy for Torres-Springer, it was personal mission. She'd earned her master's degree in urban planning from Columbia, worked for nonprofit housing developers, and spent a decade fighting for rent stabilization before Adams recruited her for his administration. Now, reading through the confidential documents, she realized her life's work had been systematically undermined by the mayor she'd trusted. The corruption was breathtaking in scope. Adams had approved luxury developments in exchange for campaign contributions, fast-tracked permits for donors, while delaying affordable housing projects, and allocated city subsidies to developers who'd promised affordable units they never built. One document stopped Torres-Springer cold, a text message exchange between Adams and real estate developer Stephen Witkoff, dated March 2024. Witkoff wanted zoning variances for a Manhattan luxury project that would displace 400 rent-stabilized tenants. Need your help with Hudson Yards project, Witkoff wrote, happy to discuss mutual benefits. Adams's response was immediate, always available for friends of the administration. Maria will handle details. The casual corruption was staggering. Adams had promised to make Torres-Springer the point person for a deal she'd never authorized, involving displacement she'd never agreed to, benefiting a developer she'd never met. But the next document was worse. An internal memo from Adams' chief of staff outlined a strategy for managing Maria's affordable housing advocacy to ensure it didn't interfere with revenue-generating development partnerships. Torres-Springer felt sick reading her own department, described as an obstacle to overcome rather than policy to implement. Adams' team had been actively working around her housing agenda while publicly supporting it. The final document was a smoking gun. Bank records showing $75,000 in payments from Witkoff's company to a consulting firm owned by Adams' longtime friend Timothy Banks. The payments were disguised as housing policy analysis, but coincided exactly with Adams's approval of Witkoff's zoning variances. Torres-Springer closed the folder and sat in silence. Everything she'd accomplished, rent stabilization protections, affordable housing development, tenant rights advocacy, had been systematically sabotaged by corruption schemes she'd unknowingly enabled. At 7 a.m. sharp, Eric Adams entered the conference room wearing his characteristic navy suit and American flag pin. His cheerful demeanor masked the calculating politician who'd been selling housing policy behind his deputy's back. Good morning, Maria. Ready for another day building affordable New York. The irony was nauseating. Torres-Springer looked at Adams, the man who'd recruited her with promises of housing justice, and saw a stranger who'd betrayed everything she believed in. Eric, we need to talk about the Witkoff development and the consulting payments. Adams' expression shifted instantly from politician smile to damage control mode. His eyes narrowed as he calculated how much Torres-Springer knew and how much damage she could cause. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe we should discuss this privately in my office. No, Eric, we discuss it here now with the documents you left for me to review. The accusation hung in the air between them. Adams realized his fatal mistake. He'd trusted Torres-Springer with confidential materials, assuming her loyalty was absolute. He'd never considered that her commitment to housing justice might outweigh her loyalty to him. Maria, I think you're misunderstanding the complexity of municipal development policy. Sometimes we need to work with private developers to achieve affordable housing goals. The condescending explanation was exactly what Torres-Springer expected. Adams was treating her like a naive idealist who didn't understand real politics, the same dismissive attitude he'd shown toward every progressive policy she'd proposed. Eric, I understand development policy perfectly. What I don't understand is why you're taking payments from developers while promising them favorable treatment. Adams' defensive posture revealed everything Torres-Springer needed to know. He wasn't denying the corruption, he was calculating whether she'd expose it. Maria, you've been an outstanding deputy mayor. Your housing work has been exemplary. But you need to understand that governing requires compromise, requires working with stakeholders across the political spectrum. The euphemistic language was insulting. Adams was calling corruption compromise, and bribery working with stakeholders. He was betting that Torres-Springer would accept these explanations rather than destroy her own career. Eric, I've seen the bank records. I know about the consulting payments. I know about the zoning variances. This isn't governance, it's a criminal enterprise. The confrontation escalated quickly. Adams dropped his political facade and revealed the calculating machine underneath. Maria, you need to be very careful about making accusations you can't substantiate. Your housing policies have been controversial. Some council members question your effectiveness. It would be unfortunate if those concerns became public. The threat was unmistakable. Adams was suggesting he could destroy Torres-Springer's reputation if she exposed his corruption. The man who'd promised to support affordable housing was threatening to sabotage her career for trying to stop housing corruption. Torres-Springer felt a clarity she'd never experienced in government. Her choice was simple: enable corruption or expose it, protect her career or protect her conscience, serve Adams or serve New Yorkers. Eric, I resign effective immediately. You'll have my formal letter within the hour. Adams was stunned. He'd expected Torres-Springer to accept his explanations, make her peace with corruption, and continue serving as his progressive fig leaf. He'd never imagined she'd sacrifice her career for principle. Maria, you're being rash. Take some time to think about this. Your housing agenda needs you. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. The psychological manipulation was textbook, appealing to Torres-Springer's dedication to affordable housing, while ignoring that corruption undermined housing policy. But she saw through the tactic immediately. My housing agenda doesn't need me, Eric. It needs honest government, something you're incapable of providing. Torres-Springer walked out of the conference room and directly to her office. She had 3 tasks: draft her resignation letter, secure copies of corruption evidence, and decide what to do next. The resignation letter was therapeutic to write. 3.5 years of frustration, compromise, and moral ambiguity crystallized into clear, devastating prose. I can no longer serve in an administration where housing policy is subordinated to pay-to-play schemes, where affordable housing commitments are systematically violated, and where the mayor's personal financial interests override the housing needs of working families. Torres-Springer printed the letter and hand-delivered it to Adams's office. She also sent copies to the city council speaker, the comptroller, and the press. By 10 a.m., her resignation was public and irrevocable. The media response was immediate and intense. Torres-Springer had been Adams's most respected deputy mayor, the progressive champion who'd lent credibility to his centrist administration. Her resignation suggested serious problems at the highest levels of city government. NY1 called her departure the most significant defection from the Adams administration. The New York Times described it as a devastating blow to the mayor's housing agenda and political standing. But Torres-Springer wasn't finished. At 2 p.m., she held a press conference outside City Hall that would reshape the entire mayoral race. Standing at a podium with the municipal building behind her, Torres-Springer delivered the most damaging critique of Adams's administration from someone with insider knowledge of its operations. For 3 years, I believed Mayor Adams was committed to affordable housing. I was wrong. Behind closed doors, housing policy has been systematically corrupted by pay-to-play schemes that benefit wealthy developers while harming working families. The accusations were specific and devastating. Torres-Springer provided dates, dollar amounts, and developer names. She described zoning variances sold to campaign contributors, affordable housing requirements waived for political allies, and city subsidies diverted to luxury developments. The mayor's housing policies aren't failing by accident, she declared. They're being sabotaged by design. The press conference dominated every news cycle. Political reporters who'd covered Adams skeptically now had insider confirmation of their suspicions. Housing advocates who defended Torres-Springer's work understood why it had been systematically undermined. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Zadran Mamdani's campaign called 2 hours after the press conference ended. "Ms. Torres-Springer, this is Zadran Mamdani. I watched your press conference this afternoon. Your courage in exposing housing corruption impressed me greatly. I wonder if we might talk about New York's housing future." The phone call was unexpected but intriguing. Torres-Springer had followed Mamdani's campaign from a professional distance, respecting his housing expertise while maintaining deputy mayor neutrality. Now, suddenly unemployed and politically liberated, she was curious about his policy vision. "Assemblyman Mamdani, I appreciate your call. What did you have in mind?" "Ms. Torres-Springer, I'm assembling a transition team focused on housing justice and municipal integrity. Your expertise in affordable housing development, combined with your inside knowledge of administrative corruption, would be invaluable." The offer was tempting but risky. Joining Mamdani's transition would be seen as political betrayal by Adams loyalists and opportunism by cynical observers. But it would also provide platform to implement the housing policies she'd fought for throughout her career. "I need to think about this carefully. My resignation was about principle, not politics. I understand completely, but sometimes principle requires political action. Sometimes the only way to serve housing justice is through electoral politics." Mamdani's analysis resonated with Torres-Springer's own thinking. She'd spent her career working within corrupt systems, hoping to create change from inside. Her resignation proved that inside reform was impossible when leadership was fundamentally corrupted. "Can we meet to discuss your housing platform? I want to understand your policy framework before making any commitments." The meeting was scheduled for August 18th at Mamdani's Queens campaign office. Torres-Springer drove across the Queensboro Bridge wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her political career or the most principled decision of her life. Mamdani's office was refreshingly different from City Hall's marble corridors and mahogany conference rooms. Located in a converted storefront in Astoria, the space buzzed with young volunteers, policy experts, and community activists working on laptops and whiteboards. This was grassroots democracy in action, the opposite of the donor-driven politics Torres-Springer had abandoned. Mamdani greeted her personally, introducing her to campaign staff and policy advisors working on housing implementation. The team was impressively diverse: urban planners, housing lawyers, community organizers, and former city officials who'd left government in frustration. "Maria, I want you to meet Sia Weaver from the Housing Justice Coalition and Tom Waters from the Community Service Society. They've been helping develop our affordable housing framework." The policy discussion was substantive and detailed. Mamdani's team had spent months researching housing law, municipal authority, and implementation strategies. Their proposals were ambitious but technically sound: rent stabilization for 1 million apartments, social housing development, tenant protection enforcement, and speculation taxes on luxury properties. Most importantly, the policies were designed to resist corruption. Transparent allocation processes, community oversight boards, and automated eligibility systems would prevent the pay-to-play schemes Torres-Springer had discovered in the Adams administration. "This is the housing agenda I've wanted to implement for my entire career," she told Mamdani after reviewing the proposals. "But how do you prevent the same corruption that undermined my work?" Mamdani's answer revealed his sophisticated understanding of municipal governance, transparency, accountability, and democratic participation. When housing decisions are made publicly with community input, corruption becomes impossible. When allocation is automated and law-based, political favoritism disappears. The conversation continued for 3 hours. Torres-Springer was impressed by Mamdani's policy knowledge, his team's expertise, and their shared commitment to housing justice. More importantly, she saw an opportunity to implement reforms she'd been unable to achieve inside the Adams administration. On August 19th, Torres-Springer made her decision. She called Mamdani personally to accept his transition team offer. "Assemblyman, I'm ready to join your housing team, but I want to be clear about my role. I'm not interested in political revenge against Eric Adams. I'm interested in policy implementation that serves working families." Mamdani's response was characteristically thoughtful. "Maria, I'm not interested in revenge either. I'm interested in governance that works. Your experience, both positive and negative, will help us avoid the mistakes that led to your resignation." The announcement came on August 22nd. Mamdani held a press conference outside the Ravenswood houses in Queens, the largest public housing complex in North America, to introduce Torres-Springer as his transition co-chair for housing and economic development. "Maria Torres-Springer represents everything we need in municipal government," Mamdani declared. technical expertise, moral integrity, and unwavering commitment to housing justice. Her courage in exposing corruption demonstrates the kind of leadership New York deserves. Torres-Springer's remarks were carefully crafted to focus on policy rather than politics. I joined this transition team because Assemblyman Mamdani has developed the most comprehensive affordable housing agenda in New York history. After 3 years of watching housing policy corrupted by special interests, I'm eager to implement reforms that serve working families rather than wealthy developers. The political impact was immediate and devastating for Adams. Torres-Springer's defection wasn't just personnel loss, it was policy repudiation by his most respected deputy mayor. Her inside knowledge of administrative corruption gave Mamdani unprecedented ammunition for his anti-corruption agenda. Adams tried to minimize the damage with characteristic deflection. Maria Torres-Springer served our administration well, but she clearly doesn't understand the complexities of municipal governance. Sometimes you have to work with private developers to achieve affordable housing goals. The response backfired completely. Adams was essentially confirming Torres-Springer's corruption allegations while condescending to the woman who designed his housing policies. Editorial boards that might have given Adams benefit of doubt now questioned his integrity and competence. The New York Times editorial was scathing. When your most accomplished deputy mayor resigns citing systematic corruption, the problem isn't her understanding of governance. The problem is your governance. Corporate donors were equally concerned. Real estate executives who'd supported Adams began questioning whether his administration could survive Torres-Springer's defection and the corruption allegations she'd validated. But the most significant impact was on Mamdani's credibility. Adding Torres-Springer to his transition team instantly elevated his campaign's seriousness and expertise. She wasn't just a housing advocate, she was a proven administrator with inside knowledge of municipal operations. Liberal voters who'd been skeptical of Mamdani's democratic socialist agenda were reassured by Torres-Springer's involvement. If a respected technocrat like Torres-Springer supported his policies, maybe they weren't as radical as critics suggested. Moderate voters who'd been concerned about Mamdani's governing experience were impressed by his ability to recruit accomplished administrators. Torres-Springer's defection suggested that competent people were choosing Mamdani over Adams. The Torres-Springer recruitment was strategic masterstroke, but it also created internal tensions within Mamdani's campaign. Some longtime supporters questioned whether recruiting Adams' administration officials compromised their anti-establishment message. During a heated transition team meeting on September 5th, DSA organizer Jennifer Gutierrez raised concerns about Torres-Springer's involvement. How do we maintain our outsider credibility while recruiting insiders from the corrupt administration we're running against? Torres-Springer addressed the criticism directly. Jennifer, I understand your concerns about my Adams administration service, but sometimes the most effective way to fight corruption is with insider knowledge of how corruption works. I know exactly which systems need reform because I've seen how they've been abused. Mamdani defended the recruitment strategy. Our goal isn't ideological purity, it's effective governance. Maria's expertise helps us implement progressive policies that actually work, rather than progressive slogans that sound good. The debate revealed philosophical tensions within Mamdani's coalition between movement activists who wanted revolutionary change and pragmatic progressives who wanted competent reform. Torres-Springer became symbol of that tension, accomplished administrator who validated Mamdani's credibility while complicating his outsider narrative. By October, Torres-Springer had become integral to Mamdani's housing policy development. Working with community organizations and legal experts, she designed implementation strategies for rent stabilization, social housing development, and tenant protection enforcement. The proposals were technically sophisticated and politically feasible. Rather than unrealistic promises, Mamdani's housing agenda offered detailed plans for achieving ambitious goals within existing legal frameworks. Torres-Springer's expertise was particularly valuable for navigating state law constraints on municipal housing policy. Her years of experience with Albany bureaucracies and federal housing programs helped design policies that could survive legal challenges and funding uncertainties. The housing platform Torres-Springer helped develop became central to Mamdani's closing campaign argument: progressive policies implemented through competent governance rather than ideological rhetoric unsupported by administrative expertise. When the Adams Islamophobic recording scandal broke in late October, Torres-Springer's defection gained additional significance. Her resignation had been about corruption, but the recording revealed the moral rot underlying Adams's administration. I'm not surprised by the recording, Torres-Springer told reporters. When someone is willing to corrupt housing policy for personal gain, religious bigotry is perfectly consistent. Eric Adams has shown us who he really is. The comment was devastating because it came from someone with insider knowledge of Adams's character and decision-making. Torres-Springer wasn't just criticizing Adams' Islamophobic comments, she was connecting them to broader patterns of corrupt governance. On Election Day, November 4th, Torres-Springer worked as volunteer coordinator at polling sites across Queens, helping ensure smooth voting in neighborhoods where language barriers and bureaucratic confusion historically suppressed turnout. When Mamdani's victory was declared, Torres-Springer felt vindication for her August resignation. The corrupt administration she'd abandoned had been decisively rejected by New York voters, who chose reform over status quo. At Mamdani's election night celebration, Torres-Springer delivered brief remarks that captured her journey from Adams' ally to Mamdani champion. 3 months ago, I resigned from municipal government because I believed corruption had made reform impossible. Tonight, New Yorkers proved me wrong. They've chosen leaders who believe government should serve working families rather than wealthy donors. The victory speech was personal vindication and political testament. Torres-Springer had sacrificed her career to expose corruption, joined an insurgent campaign to implement reform, and helped elect the most progressive mayor in New York history. But her real test would come after inauguration, when Mamdani's administration had to prove that principled governance could deliver practical results for 8 million New Yorkers. On November 15th, Mamdani announced Torres-Springer's appointment as deputy mayor for housing and economic development in his administration, the same position she'd held under Adams, but now with mandate for comprehensive reform rather than incremental change. Maria Torres-Springer represents the kind of principled leadership New York needs, Mamdani declared. Her resignation from the Adams administration showed moral courage. Her work on our transition team demonstrated policy expertise. Her service in our administration will prove that ethical governance delivers better results than corrupt politics. Torres-Springer's acceptance speech connected her personal journey to broader themes of democratic accountability. I've learned that sometimes serving the public requires abandoning public office. Sometimes the only way to preserve democratic values is by rejecting undemocratic leadership. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve again, this time in an administration committed to transparency, integrity, and housing justice. The appointment was symbolically perfect and practically important. Torres-Springer would oversee implementation of the housing policies she'd helped design, using her administrative experience to avoid the corruption that had undermined her previous work. But the appointment also represented broader themes about political loyalty, moral courage, and democratic accountability. Torres-Springer had chosen principle over party, justice over job security, and reform over personal advancement. Her journey from Adams' right hand to Mamdani's ally demonstrated that individual conscience could triumph over institutional pressure, that moral clarity could overcome political calculation, and that sometimes betraying corrupt leadership was the highest form of public service. Corporate interests that had celebrated Torres-Springer's August resignation now faced her return with enhanced authority and deeper commitment to reform. The deputy mayor they'd hoped to neutralize had become the deputy mayor empowered to implement their worst fears. Real estate executives who'd corrupted housing policy through Adams administration connections now faced Torres-Springer's oversight with transparent processes designed to prevent the pay-to-play schemes she'd exposed. 6 months after walking out of Eric Adams' conference room, Maria Torres-Springer had transformed from conflicted insider to empowered reformer. The betrayal that destroyed her relationship with Adams had created opportunity for the most important work of her career. Sometimes the greatest loyalty requires the greatest betrayal. Sometimes serving the public means abandoning public officials. Sometimes the only way to preserve democratic values is by rejecting undemocratic leaders. Maria Torres-Springer learned those lessons through personal experience and political courage. Her betrayal of Eric Adams became her service to New York, exactly as American democracy intended. The woman who'd been Adams' right hand had become Mamdani's backbone. The administrator who'd enabled corruption had become the reformer empowered to prevent it. The deputy mayor who'd resigned in disgust had returned with mandate for comprehensive change. Eric Adams had lost more than his most trusted aide when Torres-Springer resigned. He'd lost his progressive credibility, his administrative competence, and ultimately his political future. The betrayal he'd never seen coming became the victory he'd never stop regretting.